Good afternoon once again. And we usually end our Global Partner Summit with some tough talking and hard talking after all the insights that we've shared over the last 10 hours or 2 days with all of you. I hope all of you found it very insightful. With a lot more insights that we discuss internally, and now we bring to you some of those insights. So on my right is Manish Sonthalia. He needs no introduction.
All
He
right.
runs our PMS AIF. Is the CIO of that business. To his right is Aditya Khemani, running the long-term equity fund, tax plan, and the large and mid-cap fund. On my left is Siddharth Bothra, runs Focus 35, Focus 25, and a couple of other funds. And to his left is Sushmit Patodia, running some of our very interesting AIFs that have done very well. So they all have a lot of insights, and I think we don't have any session following this, so we're going to keep it open-ended for this afternoon. So Manish, I think I have some tough questions to ask you, but before that, what I'd like to know is that you face a lot of tough questions from clients all the time. So do you want to share, a couple of these, really good, maybe insightful, useful, tough questions on which you could kind of give insights, share your thoughts. Some of them may not be unreasonable, right, at all. So you want to share a couple of these things, and maybe I'll kind of put these to all of you because I may have my own tough questions, but I think ultimately clients have, we owe the most accountability to our clients to explain to them our performance, to explain to them our thought process, and so on. So maybe I start with Manish, and then we,
Sure.
go around with all of you.
Sure, Naveen, thanks. So I think interacting with client gives a lot of learning experience. That's definitely there. I mean, there's no doubt about it. When they ask you questions about companies, you understand their perspective as to how they are looking at those companies and the way they are thinking. And if they have some insights they bring forth on the table, which we may have totally missed out, so on and so forth. So it's a great experience. It's a learning experience. But when the things get slightly edgy is when clients ask for, what's your 6-month IRR on the portfolio going to be like? Or what's your one year IRR going to be like?
That's why I said, what reasonable questions are they asking you?
So, in a buy and hold approach style of investing, where the portfolio is positioned for companies that we hold in the portfolio on a 3-year rolling basis, right? We intend to hold these stocks on a 3-year rolling basis, and we base our buying or investment decisions based on fundamentals as opposed to technicals and so on and so forth. So what we bring on the table is actually superior stock selection within the whole gamut of stocks that we have. We buy 25, 30 of them and then let the whole journey of growth for that company play out. That's what we are doing. And I think, long-term approach of investors will really help our investing style. But when you are faced with a situation where clients in the investing horizon is less than 3 years, then, direction of the market, style of investing in the market, which gains flavor at times, there's style drift in markets. Somewhere you have growth style of investing taking precedence, somewhere it's value style of. We are growth investors, right? But valuations may have become, you have got front-ended returns, stocks go through corrections, time corrections particularly, and then you say, why don't you see the 6-month IRR? It's not going to be that great. Why are you holding that stock? I mean, it really creates a conundrum. So I think this is the most difficult question that I have recently faced as to how and this is all a comparison with how competition is shaping up, and given that markets are sizzling every day, and the whole idea of investors is to become rich very quickly. I mean, that's something, it's everybody wants to become big and rich but that's slightly on the dangerous side.
Right. And I think while we move to Aditya to, check on his difficult questions that he faced, I might as well ask one more question. Your flagship fund that you run is called Next Trillion Dollar Opportunity. It's a 14-year-old fund. We all know that, for the 9 years ending 2018, it had a winning streak of 24% compounded return and almost 10% alpha per annum. Quite remarkable, numbers. And everything goes through its own mean reversion, right? And the fund had a mean reversion for the last couple of years. But you've come back very strongly in the last 12 months in terms of the performance. Did you make some changes because of which this happened, or do you want to share how did all this happen, and how was that phase of a couple of years, when the performance saw mean reversion?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that each fund goes through his round of mean reversion. You have a fund which got launched 14 years back. It did quite well, and gravity will pull down performance for whatever reason. So according to me, the fund did not do well from 18 to 20. For the function of that, we had exposure to certain sectors which were correlated to the economy. We were slow in moving out, and so on and so forth. There was nothing wrong in the style of picking up the stocks. The broader markets went through some deep corrections, and we have a 50% portfolio which is aligned to the broader market space, the small and mid cap space that went to valuation correction. I think during the pandemic, again, we were faced with extraordinary situation when the whole markets melted down in a very big way. We had exposure to mid cap banks, etc. We have had to make deep corrections into that. And some of the themes that we picked up in the run up to the pandemic and even beyond that healthcare, would be in a sweet spot, or technology would be in a sweet spot. And, consumers, after the initial round of pent up demand pickup, would go through muted period of, volume growth, etc. And margin headwinds were obviously there. So some of these course correction methods, the new stocks that we have picked up with an eye on focus on having a portfolio deliver better earnings growth than the benchmark at all points in time. I think in this journey from 2020 to 2021, some of that has got achieved, and that is how valuations have become extremely sanguine. And mind you, I reiterate these points every time. Our portfolio, the TDOP and even the IOP, is fundamentally very sound. I have no doubt about the stocks that I have in the portfolio, but stocks don't move by themselves. Somebody takes it from point A to point B, and in a fund management structure, that is a function of subscriptions and redemptions. We have been facing redemptions, so what appears quite valuable, if we are to sell those very same stocks on account of redemptions, it becomes cheaper by the day. Someday somebody will realize, some smart investors will realize that this portfolio has immense value and it's become very reasonably valuable, in terms of valuation. Once that comes and subscriptions become more than redemptions, you will see the thing all go up. So in the backdrop, at a point in time when we were getting huge subscriptions, some of that outperformance also didn't belong to us, but markets rewarded with more subscriptions. So it became a virtuous cycle. Today it is a vicious cycle. So all these things are a part.
In fact, I'll put some numbers to the narrative that you just talked about. So I remember that the NTDOP portfolio, because of companies delivering very strong earnings growth during the phase that they did well, whether it's Page or whether it's Bajaj or whether it is a whole bunch of names, the residual earnings growth, or what you saw going forward, dipped to more like 20%, but the PEG went up to 2.5 times plus, right? Because
Absolutely.
of that whole, let's call it the subscription phenomena. We'll coin this term.
Yeah.
And right now, because of the redemption phenomena, we are looking at a 24% compounded earnings growth.
1.2 peg.
And 1.2 times peg. So,
FY24.
So 2.5 is now down to 1.2 times. So let's call it the redemption effect. So I think those are interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have not seen TDOP at a peg of these valuations. Yeah,
times.
I mean, one we used to trade at 3.5.
Yeah.
So it's all a part of the market that we have to live through.
Absolutely. Sure. Yes, Aditya, let's pick your brains on this.
Yeah, sure. So coming to your question on what has been the tough question from your clients. I mean, look, clients' expectation is return, but not just return, good return at all points of time. I think that's where the disconnect is. So when the going is good, obviously, I mean, everyone is happy, but it's just that when the going gets difficult, I mean, it's very difficult to explain the performance and explain the process. Because we as MOMC have a process QGLP, and any process cannot work across cycles. There will be points in time when the cycle doesn't work. Absolutely. I mean, last 2-3 years has been similar to that. But I mean, so you need a lot of patience to handle these clients. I mean, to make them understand, performance will come back very sharply. So what you've seen in the funds I manage, you've seen the performance come back very sharply over the last 6-9 months. So that's a part of the process. So I think we as an industry should help to educate the clients better that any investing process cannot perform at all points of time, because I clearly differentiate being an investor and being a trader. And for me, look, a mutual fund can also become a trading business. I mean, a fund which outperforms at all point of time, it's not humanly possible. Your process cannot perform at all points of time, which means that one doesn't have a process, which is, I think, very risky in the longer term. So one should stick to a process. There will be points in time when the cycle will be bad, but the performance will come back very strongly when it works for, when the process works for you. So that will be my this thing. Other thing is, obviously last year, I mean last 2-3 years, it's been a very polarized market. There has been stock big weightage in the index, which has just moved up massively. Suppose you don't have that stock in your portfolio, I mean, you look look like a big fool in the eyes of investors. So in case, just to give an example, Reliance, how that movement happened last year when Facebook and all invested. I mean, there was not a single day whenever sales call you were in on a distributor call, the question was, why don't you have Reliance in your portfolio? So, I mean,
And what was your reply?
I mean, I tell them that there's a process I follow. Okay. And under that process, Reliance doesn't fit into my process. And as an investor, I mean, I'm not a momentum chaser investor. I'm very careful where I'm getting into a stock. Suppose a Reliance I move from 1000 to 1800. I'm too late for the party. So I will let that stock go. I will not get in at 1800 for that last 10-20%. So I'm very careful where I'm getting in. So for me, for a stock, last year, how has that stock done? It's very important to me. I mean, what is in the price? What Manish always asks that question. What is in the price? Do I have an edge? I mean, so these are questions. And another thing like narrative versus reality. Right now, like we keep on questioning in our FM meetings that how is IT sector looking? I mean, what is the narrative around it? What is in the price? So I think those are very important to me. And probably in the last 2 years, I'll just complete 2 years on 24th July. I think it's made me much more stronger mentally, because at points of time, you have to just let this noise not disturb your investing process. Because the moment you do that, you will not be able to perform in bad time also, good time. So do what you feel is good in the longer term is what is my message is when I do this sales call.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So temperament, they say, is 99%. Nobody knows it's 90 or 99. It's not scientific, but it's hell of a lot. And I think you're really alluding to that point that, you got to get your, mind or behavior in place, particularly when things are not going your way, whether it's a fund or a stock call or a sector call. You meet with those crossroads and you have to hold your ground at those times. That's what you're really talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Siddharth, do you want to talk about, the tough questions that you have come across or faced or?
Sure. So I think some of the common ones, Manish and Aditya have covered, which is to do with sometimes a shorter duration kind of comparison and all. But in my case, I think one of the most common one I receive is because, I manage the Focus 25 large cap fund. So it is to do with the perception on large cap funds. So, there's this perception that if you're a large cap fund, then, your performance could not be very different from, say, an ETF or something. So where I need to kind of, explain them and they don't, on, how this fund is different, because I think their perception comes from a fact that, they normally look at large caps where, they almost like quasi index, where they overlap with index, like with almost like 80-85%. In our case, we almost like 50 or, even in some cases more than 50% active weight at different times. And the other thing is that, we strategically have a large cap fund under the focus large cap category, which allows us a lot of flexibility in the sense that a pure large cap fund needs to have almost 80% at all times in the top 100 companies. Whereas under my segment, which is the focus large cap, I can keep my top 100 till 65. 65 is the upper limit, and I have flexibility with 35. So from that regard, I, always, this is one of the common questions across all my interactions where, when I'm meeting someone for the first time or when they are not very clear about this fund, I think this kind of then gives them a sense as to how this is one of the most differentiated large cap fund that we have.
Well, you talked about Focus 25. I want to hear about Focus 35.
Yes.
So again, the fund was kind of a category creator, if I may call it. It gave the credibility to this thing called multi-cap fund. Eventually now, after the regulatory changes, it's all these funds have got morphed to becoming flexi-cap funds, right? But this fund was the largest fund, the best performing fund, and kind of, I would say, brought the word focus as a category, which now even the regulator has kind of uses. So phenomenal performance. But again, like in the case of NTDOP, we went through its same couple of years of drawdown, and you're very hands-on now, running this portfolio. What is it that you're really doing and planning to do or thinking about, or how do you restore the glory of this being the best performing fund once again?
Yeah, so it's been relatively a short time that I've taken this fund. So I think one of these. So of course, there's a lot of questions with regard to performance. So I think first thing is just having a background on the fund itself. Like it's almost now completing around 8 years, and out of that 8, close to 5+ years, it's been not just beaten index but beaten it significantly. So when you look at it since inception, it would still have more than 3% alpha. It would be still in the top 4-5 funds in its category. So the point is that in the life of a fund, obviously you will have as even Manish had alluded, you will have some periods when it doesn't do that well. The broader point is that you have to look at that on an 8-year period what the fund has done and so on. And my sense is that there is really nothing that we have kind of drifted away from what actually got us the glory. There have been little bit of mean reversion. Also the fact that I think there could be obviously a couple of things that we could allude to which could have resulted in not so good performance in the recent time. One of them is that post-COVID, perhaps our move towards more economy related or the positioning on the fund side was a bit on the defensive side, and hence that kind of impacted the overall returns. But I think those kind of things are more tactical. And my sense is to just do what we have done in this fund for the most part of its life, which is the majority period, which is to have extreme focus on getting the best in type quality management, very superior quality management with top rung managements, and look for companies which are growth oriented, who have the longevity and coming at reasonable, which is basically just follow the QGLP process that we have. And the whole focus is on trying to do what the fund has always done in the majority period, done well, and that's the primary thing. And I think where we stand today, there is not so much of a divergence. I mean, you need a little bit of tinkering here and there, and we've been doing that. And so I think I don't see much of a challenge. I do see that what the fund has done in the past is something we are doing the same thing. So it's essentially just focusing on believing in your philosophy. And we have had a tough time in the last 1-2 years in the fund. But I think things can change given that our focus, our commitment on what we are doing remains.
Absolutely. Sushmit, what tough questions are you facing? Because your funds are very thematic and I would say very differentiated, whether it's anti-fragile, which became very relevant during the COVID era, or it is the earlier strategies, the EOP1, SOP1 strategies. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so thanks, Naveen. And I'm a little lucky from that perspective because, I don't have the legacy that a Manish or a Siddharth carries. So, I don't have the law of averages or the law of gravity yet playing on me. So that saves me from the last 2-3 years that all these gentlemen have gone through. Having said that, what I've realized is, when we talk about equities, it's unlike soaps, right? So you don't know what you're buying, right? It's basically a promise that an investor is buying. And when the promise doesn't get delivered, then the customer feels bad or sad. So I think at that point in time, we need to communicate as to why the process has not been delivered. So, when a promise is not delivered, you can either communicate or you can not communicate, right? So there are only two choices. If you communicate, I have observed most investors understand as to what is going wrong. So I think there is a little bit of difference when investors buy funds, because actually they're not buying something which is hard or tangible. They're actually buying a promise. And it's like I always compare it to a marriage that you get into marriage saying that, okay, this is going to be a good marriage in the future. There's a promise of coming together. But if something goes wrong and you stop communicating, it typically ends up in a disaster. But if you keep communicating, then you kind of mend your differences and move on. So I think that's what I have learned in the last 2.5 years, that you will always not be able to deliver on your promise. And when you can't, it's better to communicate than to keep quiet. Very much like how we go in a relationship, frankly.
Yeah.
That's my biggest learning of the last 2.5 years. And frankly, I've, as they say, you can learn from others situations. And I've been lucky to see how Manish and Siddharth have communicated through this phase and learned from them.
Absolutely. And Sushmit, your funds are also more small and mid-cap heavy, relative to some of the other funds that we manage. And that part of the market really suffered very badly up until last year, right? I would say went to extremes of lack of belief or disbelief in this whole category, and from there last 12 to 15 months have been quite remarkable. I mean, just exactly how equities is supposed to be, when the faith is the least. And indices itself, leave alone stocks, are up 2.5 to 3 times the lows that we saw. And that's phenomenal. I mean, for those who held on and people like you who, you've created a lot of value. But how do you see this in the longer term context?
Yeah, so, just to go back to the history, I'll start from the end of the last year's talk that we had, where Manish ended the conversation saying this is the time to go and buy mid and small caps.
Yeah, this is Hard Talk 2020.
Please go and look at it. It's on YouTube, July 2020.
Yeah.
And Manish ended the talk saying this is the time to buy mid and small caps. Mid cap index is about 80% odd. Small cap index is up about 120%. Right. And, this is the funny thing about equity, that returns don't come in a linear fashion, right? Yeah. I always tell, I always compare returns from equity like taking out ketchup from a bottle of ketchup, right? They come out in spurts. You would want them to come out in a straight line, but if you squeeze ketchup out of a bottle, it'll come out in spurts. So, that is the issue with equity returns. How they'll play out. So this is the funny thing about markets. As Howard Marks says, the pendulum is never in the middle, right? Pendulum will swing from the left extreme to the right extreme. And we are already seeing that playing out in a sector, IT, where mid and small cap IT is now trading at a premium to large cap IT. See, whenever that happens, there is obviously good enough reason for it to happen. Otherwise, it will not happen, correct? But that just gives you an example as to when, I think last year, same time, we were at 25% discount to large caps, mid caps, not even small caps. And today we are at 30 to 40% premium. Right now, 25% was not right. Maybe 30 to 40% is also not right.
Yeah.
So we always want things to stand at the center, but unfortunately in markets, they never do. Right? So,
like the pendulum.
So I'm pretty certain that there will be a narrative when mid and small caps will go at a premium. Now it's only happening in one sector, but I think it will happen across sectors. Like it's happened every time in the last 15 years.
Yeah. So, Manish, they say that money is never made by buying and selling stocks. It's really made by sitting on stocks. And who can sit on stocks better than you? I mean, you want to just talk about the emotional upheavals that one goes through when one has, that long phase, because, when we run our businesses, we go through a lot of ups and downs. And having run businesses now for 3 decades, it gives you the emotional grit to embrace the downturn as wholeheartedly as you embrace the upturn. But investing is not that simple as running a business, because it provides you an exit opportunity or a window. You want to talk about this behavioral aspect of investing, which I think, at least for the 15 years that I've seen you, remarkably stands out.
So I think it comes with emotional maturity, right? It's something which has to be cultivated from within. There is a natural propensity to flip your trade given the number of ideas that come through on a daily basis. But as they say, money flows from the active investor to the passive investor. There is always a learning curve in a new company that you're going to buy. And more often than not, everything is there in the price for the next 2 years of growth. You may think that you're buying it a bit early. You may buy it a bit early. Maybe you're looking at 15, 20% or 30% upside, or maybe 50% upside. But you're never going to create wealth if you're gunning for those 20, 30% upside, and then you want to flip on to a new idea. It is the emotional grit, and that comes through understanding the dynamics of the business. If you understand how the business goes about making money, and that is a function of competitive advantages, and you compare it with the other names that you want to buy in your portfolio, you watch out for the differences in the strengths of the company, how long those strengths are going to remain with the company, how the company makes money. You get an idea of how much cash flows a company is going to make over a lifetime. When you buy a new company, all of that is not known to you. You basically have a basic construct about that business. That only happens through time traveling. You know more things about the company on an ongoing basis. Nuances are learned on an ongoing basis. You can't be saying that, or you can't be getting it too right if you say that I have a new idea which I've started researching 2 months ago. Now know enough about the company, and I'm now good to hold that company for whatever time frame you want to hold. It comes with cultivation of this thing has to be cultivated from within. It just can't happen overnight. You have to live through this phenomenon. The habits have to change. I mean, I remember when I came to markets and investing some 25, 30 years ago, I also was with the same, money making is very easy. You buy, sell, buy, sell. Those are mistakes. And that is a learning cost that one has to bear if one has to make it a success in the stock market journey.
Yeah. But in this kind of a market, with fanciful IPOs opening every day, the lure of the next best thing is harder to resist than ever before, right?
So we have defined the paradigms for ourselves, right? We can't own more than 30 stocks. Market is full of 3,000 stocks. Each new day you have a new listing IPO. So, I think the noise is immense. Tons of data thrown at you, very little information. You have got to decipher the information. There are no free lunches. Where the sell side throws ideas at you, there are no free lunches. Believe you me. You've got to do your own work about these companies, no matter how with whatever conviction these analysts, you've got to understand it. You can't be leaning on borrowed conviction. It is a disaster. And we have a fiduciary responsibility on account of our clients that we'll do our best when it comes to implementing the process, when it comes to practicing that. You can't be saying that the sell side came and told me this and now I've lost money. Of course, mistakes are going to be made. Nobody is a god. But if we are able to increase our strike rate from whatever levels we are at, we're only going to get better. So I think the whole thing is again to, make yourself mentally more tough. That's a sure must in the age that we are in, where markets are hot and sizzling every day. A lot of ideas, but you got to weigh the pros and cons as to how much you understand what is there in the price, what is the edge that we have remaining within the circle of competitors, rather than just the flavor and glamour around many of these names. Look, if a stock is very popular, then either you are going to be the sucker who is going to hold the last bit, and you'll be ending up selling losses, or there's something very unusual about that business that you still have to. So I think it's hard work, 24/7, 365. Keep learning something new every day. There are no shortcuts. If somebody tries to get a shortcut, trying to get too rich quickly, it's going to be dangerous and disastrous.
So this is the second aspect of temperament. We spoke about the earlier one, and this is the other aspect. So temperament has many facets. I think through this conversation, maybe we uncover more of them, because that's really 99%. Aditya, you are
Just 1 second. I
Of
mean,
course.
talking of hard work and 24/7. I mean, our meeting was supposed to start at 2 o'clock. I went to Manish Tumai at 1:50. He was hearing TSMC calls, trying to gauge what is the semiconductor shortage and how long it will continue. I told him, let's go up. Let's go down. He said, no, let me complete the call. So that is hard work for
Yeah.
everyone, in case people don't know Manish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that is something that arguably is quite underrated, if I may, on the buy side, because normally the first feeling is that it's an easy job, but I think it's arguably far harder, because making your mind work all the time is, I think, far more difficult than making your bodies work for long. And that's something that I'm getting to learn, stepping into the asset management business.
And to add on to that, I mean, I entered this business 16 years back. I mean, 10 years back, there was limited businesses. But I'm a very bottoms up stock picker kind of person. So today, if I see, like, there are so many businesses which have listed over the last 10 years. I mean, there's a AMC business, there's a life insurance business, there's a general insurance business, there's a card business. Now, I mean, there's
Digital
a
businesses.
food tech business are getting listed. So, I mean, there's no shortcut to hard work. So, I mean, just to add on to what Manish has said, that, I mean, life of a active fund manager is getting much more difficult by the day. So we have to rise to the challenge by slogging as much as possible. So that is just to add to this.
No, absolutely. I mean, I always, I cannot see the half glass full, half glass empty. I always see the half glass full. So I would turn that into saying that this is a learning expedition, and your learning expedition now seems to have a longer runway than you may have had in a rather licensed drudge economy that Vallabhbhai spoke about, earlier on, when we had a handful of companies to really look at. So the next question to you, Aditya, is that QGLP is a very evolved framework. Wealth creation studies started in the year 1995. 2020 marked the completion of 25 studies. And it has many nuances, many insights, many frameworks that we've collected over a period of time. With such structured thought process, what were your early, should I say, misunderstandings of QGLP and your evolution of your understanding of QGLP? There's been, just as you said, a couple of years, if I may.
Sure. Look, when I came to Motilal AMC, I mean, I read about QGLP, but I was not an insider. So I did not know as much about QGLP. So, but after I joined here, Q came very naturally to me, because, I mean, if I see how I've evolved over the last 15 years, I've been a very quality conscious investor in terms of quality of business, quality of management, cash flow is very, very important to me. So Q came very naturally to me. But one thing, when I came here, G and L is something I've honed. I mean, I think I've become much better investor today than what I was 2 years back. Because if I go through my last 5-7 year journey also, there have been points in time when probably I bought a stock just because it is cheap. Optically, P has been 13-15x. I mean, ITC today is 13-15x. Not to this, I'm just giving you an example. So probably 5 years back, I would have just bought ITC thinking it is cheap. So let me buy it. It's there in the index. Let me buy some bit of it. But I think with Ramdevji and all, with the discussions, I have understood that any stock is cheap for a reason. I mean, just because you buy a 13-15 PE stock does not mean you cannot lose money on that stock. One is that. And secondly, just because you bought cheap, that doesn't mean that stock will outperform the index or that will do very well. So one has to be very careful as to the G and L is there in the stock. So that is one part. Second part is, historically, I have not liked businesses which have required a lot of capex. Okay, those businesses might be a 15% ROIC business, but they require a lot of capex. So I have not liked those businesses in the past. But now I think reinvestment rate is very important to me. I mean, to Ramduji only has made us understand reinvestment rate is very important. So in case a business can take in a lot of capital, but still give you a 15% ROIC, I think that business can generate a lot of return for shareholders. Just to give an example, real estate is one sector. We keep on debating where is the ROC in a sector, where is the ROIC in sector. Optically, it looks 10-12%. But I was wondering, again, a lot of these good real estate names like a Goodrich Property or a Oberoi. I mean, these are names which are very, I mean, trust is very important in this business. So, plus the reinvestment rate is very high. They can raise as much of capital. They can become a factory. They can launch 100 projects. The ROIC could be 13-15%, but still for a shareholder, they will be able to generate a lot of wealth. Similarly, businesses like hospitals, business like malls and all, optically they might look at 13-15% ROIC, but the reinvestment rate is very high in those businesses. That's why there's a disconnect when people talk hospital business trading at 20-25 EV EBITDA. Where is the value? That is because those businesses have a much higher reinvestment rate. Hence, the longer term growth is much higher in those businesses. So that is the other learning I have got from a nuances of G and L. The fourth is P. I mean, there's always been a debate. When I came here, I used to wonder, why does P come after QGL? So does that mean QGL is more important and P is less important? But I mean, as an outsider, I had those questions. But over time, I've realized QGL is basic. You have to follow QGL. There might be 100 businesses which have that QGL characteristic in them, but we cannot buy 100 companies because as a style, we have less than 30 names across our portfolio. So P becomes very, very important. P is more important or equally important than a QGL. So I think last 2 years, P to me has become very, very important. So that's why I meant in my initial comment, what is there in the price, what Manish keeps on saying. So how do you see what is there in the price? So one way I look at that is, how has the stock done last 3 years? Okay. And secondly, how has been the earning last 3 years? In case there's a big disconnect between the two, in case the stock is up 200% and the earning is only up 50%, which means a lot of the narrative is already in the price. So, I mean, there's a lot of debate internally now when I buy a stock that P has to be, you have to make return from the current point, because at times we get swayed. I like this company long term, 5 year, 10 year, but that doesn't mean anything to me. You have to make a return in a stock for the next 3 years. I mean, then you see, will this stock make me return next 3 years? Okay, in case it will make you return next 3 years, then you see, will it make you a return next 1 year? Because you have to break down that bigger periods into shorter time frame. Because you have to understand, I mean, recently we did a meeting with one of the CEOs of a leading mutual fund. He mentioned that point, we are in the business of investing. So I've always thought we are into investing, but there's a difference between investing and business of investing. So I think last 1-2 years, it has made me a better person, realize that we are in the business of investing. So longer term stock and all good, you have to evaluate the business model, but at the same time, be careful, be sure that stock will give you return next 1-3 years. So those are the things I've understood in a QGLP framework. And you know that, I mean, we keep on debating, discussing, I mean, so that the process evolves. I mean, like metals is a sector, when I came in here, probably I would have not looked at metals. QGLP seemed at loggerhead with metals. But now, I mean, we are also open to change, process also evolving. So there's an open mind to it. So we are learning on the way, but these are the some things I've learned over the last couple of years. And maybe it will make me a better investor.
That's a lot of learnings, I must say, in a couple of years. Yeah, in a 16-year career, you're still learning at a steep learning curve pace, I would say. So Siddharth, I remember a few years back when the world was worried about the triple-digit multiple of DMart, right? You made a very exhaustive presentation on, DMart is Flipkart several decades ago, and that the P then was not reflective of really the potential, and it could actually be higher, or even buying at that could give you a runway. I'm reminded of this Einstein quote that, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Sure. So again, you go back a century and what counted then was transportation, chemicals, industrials. That was the railroads,
steel making companies.
Yeah, that was the buzzing thing. Materials. Today, 50% of all of the market cap of United States is intangibles, asset-light businesses. So the world has come, a full circle. So I think you kind of represent that thought process a lot. And when one looks at your portfolio over a period of time, you practice that quite meticulously. You want to share some thoughts on this, building on the QGLP framework, and then the times that we are living in when these things become quite important. In fact, I recently read something very interesting which said that Graham is not wrong. It's just that you don't understand intrinsic value. I mean, intrinsic value is defined as tangible plus intangible assets. But if you don't value those intangible assets, you may feel like Graham is a fool, but probably you are a fool, right? So how do you think about this?
Yeah, no, so I think this is a trend we are seeing globally. Like, as you rightly mentioned, in US, if you look, 50% of the balance sheet of most corporates would be in intangible assets. So, if you essentially see, we have been through ages in the investing also. There was one in industrial age, which was about, which was the Graham's period, which was about, say, valuing railroads, valuing steel companies, valuing something very, very tangible. So when you look at the value of a company, maybe 90 or predominantly it used to be tangible assets, hard assets, which you could value and so on. Then we moved to the consumer age where, it was about brands, it was like about Coca-Cola and so on, which is where we saw the evolution of Buffett lean more towards Munger and, move away from following just cigar butt kind of investing to more like evolved investing where, he felt that it was better to kind of buy wonderful companies at fair price rather than, buy
fair companies at cheap prices.
So, and from there, I think now we are moving to an age which is about, information age, about platform businesses age. It's an age where essentially it's about asset-light businesses. It's about intangible assets a lot more. So, if you look at most of the large companies today, they don't need tangible assets to create wealth. I mean, in fact, bulk of the value that they have lies in the intangible side. So, when we talk of intangibles, it could be intellectual property, it could be brands, it could be human capital when you're looking at some services company, or it could be just network effect. So the point is that unless you value that, you would never be able to kind of get a sense of the value of a company. So I think that's the point one. So I think for me, I think management has always mattered. I think who runs the business or, who are the people behind it. I think people make a big difference. So, if you have, say, 2 HFC companies and say one is run by a different kind of a management, like let's take the case in our, of one of the HFCs. Like during their last 2-3 decades, they have kind of created not only one of the biggest private bank companies, they've created one of the largest asset bank, management companies, they've created one of the best life insurance companies. So it's all about getting the human capital right. If you would have just measured it on a pure numbers basis, you would have never got the thing. So I think for me, it's always been focusing more on the, rather than just the quantitative part, more on the qualitative part, more on the intangibles, because I think that's where you can create a differentiation. Because today, even a normal software screen can, try and tell you which is the cheapest one or where the next 2 years growth is highest and so on. I don't think you create an edge in investing by doing that. So the focus needs to be a lot there. And I think the other point which you rightly mentioned about Graham is right. I think, in fact, I think even if you go back to the Graham book, because, I come across many people or some of my, very good friends and all, they also have this conception that, if it's a 15-20 or if it is 1-time, 2-time book, or they put a numerical number to it, then it's cheap. Otherwise, it's a no-go.
Then it's value. Otherwise, it's
it's a hope thing or something. But if you read Graham's book itself, The Intelligent Investor, and read the revised version of 74, there himself he's given, his formula of growth is given. His formula of growth is that the value of a company is EPS into, he writes is at 8.5 plus 2G. which was his first one. So this was when, essentially it means that if, you think the growth is 10, then multiplied by 2, it becomes, 20, you add 8.5. So 8.5 for him was the multiple for a completely no growth company.
Ex-growth.
So that is the value he would give to a company. That is EPS into this. And then, in 24, in his revised edition, he actually, bought in the thing which was missing in that, which is the interest rate. So he further divided it by 4.4 into, he kind of divided by the interest rates of the AAA corporate bonds in US. So if you do that, then you will see that, there is really not much variance. So, he never was of the view that you can't buy growth companies and all. It's just that at that time, growth used to be transient. Like, think about it, like, if you just think about it, why it was so. Because if you are in the business of making paper or steel, the moment a cycle comes or you do 2-3 years good, your competitors can set up another plant or something, prices can come down. So, your advantage can be competed away. You cannot have a prolonged period of competitive advantage. But that changed the moment you move to the consumer world, where, brands like Coca-Cola invested like hundreds of billions of dollars in building their brands. And it's an enduring mode. No one else can come in and disturb that. So they can have a very, very prolonged period of growth. We already seen so many consumer companies which have like now 100 years or 200 years in case of some capital goods and all, and they're still called growth companies. So that was unheard of at his stage, at the kind of companies which are available. And now what we're having is completely different. It's like platform companies. And these platform companies are about network effect. So unless, I think this would be the enduring theme for the next few years. Globally, it is already there, even in India. Because network effect is something which just gets bigger and bigger the moment you keep because it's about having an advantage at one end on the on the consumer end, and the other the one you are transacting with. And if both the sides you keep growing, then unlike other companies where say if you are a paper company and sales goes from you become from 1 million to 2 million, and say assuming at 1 million you were making say 100, and you move to 2 million, you make 110. But in these kind of network companies, the moment you move from 1 to 2, your advantage is actually disproportionately higher. So I think unless one values or gives them a lot of importance as such, you will miss the point. I mean, you'll miss the point, and the point that you kind of put everything on Graham, or you try to be purist. Like a lot of the people who shrug it off have a view that I'm a purist. I go by value. So I think perhaps you're not even going by value, because I mean Graham in his book has mentioned how to value growth companies, and these are aspects which he's talked about. Maybe at that time it was not so prevalent, and today all businesses are like that. Like so, if you look at my portfolio, most of the businesses you rightly mentioned, they would be very asset light. These would be businesses where the intangible assets are more important, which sometimes don't get reflected in your next year's earnings and so on. But the valuation of a company captures that.
Yeah, in fact, I think the 2016 book, End of Accounting, dwells a lot deeper into this whole aspect of how, balance sheets of these companies and P&L of these companies are totally distorted because you're expensing your balance sheet items and valuation numbers are derived out of the old erstwhile annual report and P&L items, which are probably not showing you the right picture. Sushmit, you did some interesting study on the profit pools and gives you a runway for how small and mid caps can do better, because the profit pool buildup itself is quite remarkable. Do you want to share some of the thoughts on how you think about the build out of profit pool, and in turn how does it impact your way of investing or portfolio construction?
Yeah, just to also add my 2 bits on this whole Graham thing is very interesting. If you look at this demographics, actually, sometimes I wonder if, everything evolves because of the humans who are in play at that point in time. So when Graham was investing, the life expectancy of an individual was 40. There was no need to compound beyond a point, right? Because you could only start investing at the age of 27, 28, and
you could have to sit just as far as a decade,
right? But I think when Buffett started investing or Munger started investing, the life expectancy moved to 55, 60. So you had to compound, right? Today, our life expectancy is hitting 75, 80. So that I think it'll be something else. I mean, it'll not be compounding, but we'll have to hyper compound or blitz compound, right? Because all models will break down. I don't think any business is also made to survive for 60 years or compound for 60 years, not survive, but compound. So somewhere I think that the society or the socio-economic of the society defines the commerce. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So somewhere I got this idea because if you look at Spanish flu, it's very interesting. They didn't go for a lockdown. Why? Because the life expectancy was small. So, so for them, the number of years left was not so much to let 2-3 years go away. It was 5% of their life to get locked down. Today, we are ready to get locked down for 3 years because it's 2% of our life. Right? So I think somewhere humans or humanity defines the commerce as well to an extent.
Yeah.
Coming to the profit pool, what we've realized in terms of profit pool is, when you when you look at a simple metric like corporate profit to GDP, right, which is, let's say, 1.8% at the bottom, people are talking about FY21 to be as high as 4%, right? Within that, how it behaved is what gets very, very interesting, right? So in the last 7 years, India, for, I would say not 7 years, but 4 years starting from DMON, Indian companies which looked inward had a very troubled time, right? Because you had DMON, GST, IBC, RERA, and COVID, right? I think these are 5, if there were earthquakes, they were on the Richter scale of 8 happening in India every year, right? So they kind of rocked the economy. And if you look at small cap and mid caps, very interestingly, 80% of small cap and mid caps are companies which are inward looking, right? Most large caps are actually outward looking, right? Or either their clients are from the West world or they get capital from the West world. So like, for example, I think some of the leading banks in India actually are West looking, while they look internal, but they get all their capital from the West, right? HDFC is primarily owned by foreigners. HDFC Bank in turn is also primarily owned by foreigners, right? So when the local economy doesn't do well, large caps start, they don't get so impacted, so they continue to do well. But when the economy recovers, like we expect it to over the next 3-4 years, and corporate profit to GDP recovers, majority of that recovery actually will come from domestic facing companies, right? So if I were to strip out that 1.8 going to 5 in the next 2 years, it will be domestic profit pool actually going from -2 to +2.
Right.
Right. So that is the beauty that happens when you have that cycle change. And I think Mr. Vallabh sir said it so beautifully that this $150 billion that is created is such a big currency for us, right? And they deserve to be large caps, right? Because I think, he used the word that Mr. Murthy has done a service, the biggest service to India since independence. I think that really has given me a lot to think about. But it is so true. If you don't have this $150 billion currency, we may not be sitting in such a beautiful office or on a wooden oak table and comfortable chairs, right? So, but this cycle to me looks like if you were to go to a granular level, the domestic facing companies would probably go from a -2% to a +2% corporate profit to GDP.
Yeah. And in that context, the funds that you run and the small and mid cap focus that you have, how does that? There's a lot of talk about, winner takes all, big becomes bigger. It sounds like this whole segment is very victimized.
Yeah, somewhere, I think so. I've always been very, very, I've been very, very of this unorganized to organized, right? I believe that the bigger theme is formalization. It is not unorganized to organized, right? Because unorganized to organized, as you very rightly said, is a very victimized kind of theme, right? Because it's basically telling you that the unorganized is going to die, wash away, and the organized bigger will get bigger, right? But I strongly believe it is formalization. India is a land of entrepreneurs. The sad part in India is not the number of entrepreneurs, right? We have 6.3 crore enterprises, but we have only 22,000 who's paid up capital is more than 10 crore rupees. That is the sad part, right? I think Manish Sabharwal, again at the conference, very beautifully said, the problem in India is not jobs, it is wages, right? So I believe formalization removes all this cholesterol for companies to become bigger. So to me, the biggest theme in India for the next 4-5 years is going to be formalization, not unorganized to organized. I think that's not a pleasant thought according to me, right? But if a small firm becomes big, and we've seen that happen in markets, right? 2-3 small cable and wire companies. 5 years ago, I don't think we had any, I mean, I wouldn't have dreamt of them turning a 500 or 1,000 crore profit, right? These companies are now talking about 500,000 crore profit. So were they unorganized 7 years ago? Maybe. So suddenly have they become organized? I don't think so. They just become formal.
And all this is even without the full benefit of these reforms, where we didn't have an economic upcycle to really leverage a full impact of GST or a full impact of RERA. And I think many of them may unfold in the next 5 years' time.
I think till now it has just been people who have opted to formalize.
Yeah.
I think after a year, people who don't formalize will actually die, right? So I think it is informal to formal rather than unorganized to organized.
Just to give you a little example, when you run, they say investing and businesses are joined at the hip. So when we run businesses, we see what you're saying. So people talk about number of brokers coming down and the share of top 10 brokers going up. And that's very true. But again, it's not that, kill the small broker or death of the small broker. In fact, they're becoming far more prosperous because they're aligning themselves as franchisees of the large brokers, and in the process taking out cost and getting far more scalability because of risk management, research, brand equity, and so on. So it's really actually win-win. It sounds like very win-lose. So that's not the case. So Manish, turning to you, you run a small and mid-cap portfolio, IOP, as it is popularly called. And that has again done remarkably well in its early phase, went through its drawdown, but it hasn't participated as much as the fancy or the crazy run in the small and mid cap indices. And that's not surprising because most active managers have not been able to catch pace with the crazy all pervasive market move driven by a lot of retail investor activity currently. How would you think about IOP as a strategy from the next 3 years perspective?
So I think it's one of the safest portfolios. All stocks are multi-baggers. At what point in time will that happen? It's only anybody's guess. What I can say is that 30 stocks picked on a bottom-up approach basis. This is how we started even the TDOC portfolio, right? As a small cap, mid-cap portfolio where the vision was that some of these businesses will become very big.
Yeah.
It has become a multi-cap. It will eventually become a large cap strategy. So it's a similar journey. It's not a one-way journey. There are ups and downs. 100 rupees first became 40 rupees or 50 rupees in TDOP also. That's the phase of IOP that we are going into. So talking about what happened last year is that we have had to take course corrections in mid-cap banks, etc., which obviously in the post-pandemic environment were not to do well. And that has cost us on 25% of our total fund size. That has cost us 25% allocation. Some of it has got made up with some of the differentiated stocks that we have bought. Some of the IT names, which have done superlatively well over the last 1.5, 2 years, 5x, whatever number, that is one piece that we have to solve in IOP, but valuations look extremely prohibitive. Even if we talk about the fact that we are in mid-cycle valuations, growth is going to last, let's say, 4-5 years. So apart from that piece, I think the key themes that is being played out in IOP and IOP V2, incidentally, IOP V2 did very well, is that you can't buy all the 100 components of the index, right? NSE small cap is made up of 100 components. We can buy 30 components out of that. So you prioritize some of the themes according to what is likely to do very well. In my portfolio in IOP, I'm prioritizing three themes at this given point in time, apart from individual stocks picked on a bottom up. One is your healthcare, which is pharmaceuticals. It's going to be a structural theme over the next 3 to 5 years. It's likely to stay that course. Not only will earnings expand, but valuations are also likely to extend. Gland Pharma, Alchem, Ipca, all a part of that. Then we're looking at the building materials. I think, there's been ample, commentary on this forum as well about how the real estate space is in a nascent stage. You don't have too many actual real estate companies in the small and mid cap, but you can play through building materials, cement, tiles, plyboards, so on and so forth, leaning on that side, even adhesives and so on and so forth. And the third is basically autocoms. Autocoms which are actually not getting hindered to a very large extent because of the EV disruption. So you have fasteners, which in all likelihood not going to get impacted with EVs. Or you have, let's say, shock absorbers, which are not going to get impacted with EV or ICE, right? Or Suprajit, you talk about cables. You're going to require cables. You're even looking at motors, so on and so forth. This space is going to see an increased opportunity within the overall increase in the number of automobiles, whether two-wheelers, fast cars, or four-wheelers. Lean on that space, which is an out-of-favor sector. Apart from the rest, it is all bottom-up approach, where these are not very, or let's put it, these are anti-consensus ideas. When you buy anti-consensus names, much beyond what is there in the flavor, and you have this earnings trajectory of 18-24%, which I say is doubling of profits every 3 to 4 years. I think it's likely to do very well. As has been the journey of IOP, did very well. It's not going to be a one-way journey. It's going to be this is the most volatile segment of the market. This is not a product for all investors. Those who have got a strong heart to see 20-25% deviation that is dipped from the capital level, they can only create multi-baggers out of the portfolio. But I have very strong conviction in this portfolio. I have very strong conviction on the safety of this portfolio at this given point in time, the valuation concept. That's how I look at it.
Sure. Aditya, turning to you. You had positioned your portfolio, quite in favor of economic recovery, and that's why something like a COVID obviously set you back for a little while. And this spans across consumer discretionary companies, to industrials, to financials, to a whole bunch of. How do you think about your whole positioning at this point in time, and with the risk of, and we had the COVID specialist also probably gave some silver lining. How do you think about the positioning of the overall portfolio from the next 2-3 years perspective?
Sure, Naveen. So just to give you a background, long-term equity fund I took over in September 2019, and the large and mid-cap fund was launched in October 2019. So in the first 6 months I was here, I constructed a portfolio, bottoms-up portfolio of 27-28 names. The portfolio was doing pretty well till the time COVID struck us, but came March 2020. And within no time, you saw all the stock be down 40, 50, 60%. So at that point of time, positioning was, I was overweight on financials, I was overweight on consumer discretionary. Okay. So COVID struck us, stocks being down 40, 50%. I had two choices in front of me. One, to get rid of all those stocks, all those impacted stock sector, and get into the flavor of the month or flavor of the quarter at that point of time. The other thing was, I looked into my portfolio. Who are these companies I bought in the portfolios? The 28 companies I have in the portfolio, most of the companies are leaders in the entire space. Okay. So what came across me is that, in any adversity, a leader will become stronger and better. We've seen through Demon, GST, and COVID is the mother of all crises. So, the portfolio had to do well once the normalcy came in from that point of view. And I was sure that the portfolio companies will become much stronger in times to come. So I stuck to the second thing, let me not sell those stocks. Let me stay with these businesses. They might do badly next 6-9 months. Like company like a United Breweries, when the bars are shut, how is the company expected to do well? When a Phoenix Mill, when the malls are shut, how is the company supposed to do well? And to combine with that, the market has become a very just in time from that point of view. When the company does well, market tends to reward company at that point of time. That is a trend I'm seeing over the last few years. That's why a lot of these companies where business has not bounce back, you have not seen the stock bounce back in the same way. And companies like IT and all, which haven't had disruption, they have bounced back in a much stronger way. But I'm sure in the next 6-9 months, you've seen some bit of it last 3-6 months, but going ahead, as and when normalcy comes in a fuller manner, you will see these stocks everyone will want to buy in the portfolio. I mean, I asked myself a question: in case someone consumes beer, will he not go back to consuming beer as and when things become normal? I mean, will we not go back to visiting malls, being a part of our entertainment, this thing, one thing resume? So I've stuck to my positioning. I have not changed too much of the stocks in my portfolio. The other thing I've done is, I mean, I don't like momentum as a style. Generally, my style is, in case my portfolio stock becomes high momentum, is given me good return, I'm happy to give that stock. But move to a stock which has not done very well, because price is very important to me. So today, if I have to see next 2-3 years, I mean, market has clearly segregated in terms of COVID-proof stock and COVID-impacted stock. So today, my portfolio is 70% allocation is towards sectors which are play on economic recovery, and 30% defensive. So within that 70%, banking is the biggest sector. Banking is 30 to 33%. I own the best banks in the portfolio. And last year, whatever asset quality we thought will come across banking space, I mean, I've been positively surprised how the book has behaved for a lot of these well-managed banks, including SBI. We always question how will SBI's asset book do in a bad cycle, but I've been positively surprised. So I think banking is the biggest play on any recovery next 2-3 years, because you cannot grow without banking participating in that recovery. So banking is 30 to 33%. The balance consumer discretionary is around 20% of the portfolio. I mean, consumer discretionary, I believe in small ticket size consumer discretionary items, because that is a segment where I think income loss won't have too much impact on the segment growth. Something like a beer, something like a baguette, something like a pizza, I mean, restaurant or something. Because I think last 1 year, I mean, we have realized that people want small moments of happiness. So I think these small ticket size items will become, I mean, where people would like to indulge as and when things become normal, because we've been so stuck at home. I mean, I was reading that UK breweries are completely sold out. There's no capacity in brewery, and we're reading from US, UK, what's happening there. So I think same thing will happen to India next 2-3 years, because I mean, a lot of people look at these businesses, they say they're optically high on a PE basis. But one thing you have to remember, that in a bad time, the most impacted company will do the most cost rationalization. So these businesses have rationalized their cost so much in the last 12-18 months. So when they return to the same amount of sales, the margin, people will be completely surprised from that point of view. So consumer discretionary is one part of 20% allocation. The balance, I'm very positive in the real estate sector, but I'm playing more through the ecosystem around it, like cement. I mean, cement is 8-9% of the allocation. I meet a lot of people who don't believe in the sector like cement. They say it's a commodity. I mean, I'll tell them, cement is what, 350 rupees per bag, 50 kg bag, 7 rupees per kg. It is the cheapest commodity on earth, 7 rupees per kg. And for every 1 ton cement, you need 4 to 5 ton of movement of material. You need fly ash, you need limestone. So it's a very difficult business. It's a very supply chain led business. So as a company, in case your mine is near the limestone reserves, you need to have market around it. So it's a very, very difficult business. I mean, which business? It's a business which has a negative working capital. So after expansion, I mean, you've seen Shree Cement after the 5 expansion has 5,000 crore debt on the balance sheet. So real estate ancillary, like a cement, like a tile maker, like a electrical good maker is one part of it. The fourth bucket I'm playing is infrastructure and capital good. There, I'm a bit short on it. I want to add a few names more. I have one construction company, and I have a city gas distribution company, Gujarat Gas, in the portfolio. So these are the 4 buckets, 70% allocation among these sectors, the balance in 30 in defensive. And within defensive, just like Manish, I'm very, very positive on Indian healthcare. It's 15% allocation. Again, coming to COVID, I think the most important realization to all individuals is how important is our lives, hence how important health is. So I think spend across the healthcare chain will remain high for a long period of time. So I'm more positive on the domestic pharma names, from a domestic pharma company, IPM-led company, to a diagnostic company, to a hospital, because I think that chain will make a lot of money in times to come. I was just reading something, why is hospital so attractive? I mean, when we go to any store, we have decided we want a soap or we want a detergent, but hospital is the only place where we go and we don't know what will be served. I mean, it's like, so that goes to show what is the pricing power a hospital has from that segment. So healthcare is one thing I'm very positive. And even though I've classified that healthcare in a defensive, but I think that's also recovery play. I mean, people have had no surgeries last 1 year. So just understand, I mean, the amount of surgeries, elective surgeries will take place, hence the diagnostic test, and the consumption of more acute driven medicine will take place. So that is 15% allocation, and I'm underweight IT. So net 70% allocation is towards a recovery led sector. And more than just sector, Naveen, I'm very agnostic on valuation. So I categorize my portfolio into 3 buckets. I mean, what is a value component in my portfolio? What is a GARP component, and what is a growth at any price component? And my style is, I would like to buy companies which are either value, which will move to GARP at some point of time, or GARP, which will move to growth at some point of time. For example, stocks like a Jubilant Foodwork or a Dr. Lal. I mean, those are stocks I bought at slightly GARP, but they have become now very expensive, hence growth. But Gujarat Gas I bought at value. So, I mean, right now portfolio positioning is 20% value, 50% GARP, and 30% growth at any price. Because I want to position the portfolio next 3 years when the economic recovery happens, you will see this part of the bucket, value and GARP, do very well actually. Because I mean, growth gets opened. We are not willing to value a company which is growing at 15% at a much higher multiple when there are tens of companies which can grow at that rate. So just to summarize, 70% allocation towards economic recovery play. I think that should help the portfolio. Second bit is higher allocation towards companies which are more value and GARP, more GARP in the entire portfolio. For example, recently you would have seen I've added SBI 5% in the portfolio. So that, because that is the trend, I think next 2-3 years, investing, I mean, you will make much more money in terms of being positioned towards value and GARP side of the market rather than growth being at any price part of the market. Because that's where, I mean, coming to my earlier point, business of investing and investing, these are 2 separate things. So at points of time, you have to think, will this stock make money next 3 years? For example, a stock like a Dr. Lal, I mean, I bought at 1300-1400 rupees, now 3500 rupees. I think, should I sell that stock? It has become very expensive. So it is challenging, but endeavor is to move money from that part of the bucket into buckets which has a much higher IRR for the next 3 years. Because you know that, I mean, when this large and mid cap fund was getting launched, Motilal Oswal put the biggest money into the fund, and you are the investor into the fund.
Yeah.
So you asked me what is the IRR you're going to give me, just like a distributor asked me the question. So I mean, 3-year doubler is what we had targeted, which means a 25% annualized return. So I mean, so far in the 20 month, it's given a 27% annualized return. So I think return becomes a paramount in terms of deciding how to manage the portfolio. That's where I'm very confident that portfolio should do very well next 2-3 years from that point.
Absolutely. Yep. Thanks for that elaborate answer. Sid, turning to you, final question to you. How do you see, the future? I mean, there's obviously this whole recovery led narrative, which is very strong. But when you apply your own frameworks, what are you kind of most excited about from the next 3 to 5 years? Obviously, recovery will play out, economic recovery, earnings growth coming back, markets getting more broad. We're already seeing that. But what really stands out in terms of any thought processes of what you like, how you think about the future?
Yeah, so I think there are 2-3 things here. One is that the economic recovery plays are definitely very attractive because what's happening is we are seeing several sectors and all. Like, say, let's look at the investment side. We've not seen anything at all for almost like a decade now. So those are segments where things are just getting started. When you look at the capital goods sector or many of these things, like I even like cement, which Aditya alluded to. So these are things where you already allocated, and the idea would be to, as in when you get more and more evidence of, your entire recovery theme actually playing out, you would want to increase your weightages. But I think other than that, I think one theme which I definitely see is the new opportunities that you're getting. There are many kind of businesses which were not available to be invested in India. I think in next sometime, say in a year or something, you will get some of those opportunities. So I think that's where I see another opportunity other than the economic recovery plays. And I also see that, since market is always so dynamic and, moving at a particular this thing. So now, since everyone's so focused on the economic recovery plays, I also feel what's happening is that, pure enduring plays where businesses have done well for, decades, which are, generating huge free cash flows and so on. They've corrected so much that I think there are a lot of value there itself. So I think the way I see market today is like, though optically it looks like the market's very expensive and it's run up quite a bit. But, for a bottom-up investor, I think there are a lot of opportunities in different pockets. And I have never seen market this broad-based in the last 6-7 years that, when I look at my immediate history, it was always the opportunities seemed concentrated in one or two segments. Either you were looking at the consumer side or you looked at a particular side, and, you never had such a wide array of opportunities. I think today it's quite wide, and I think so it just goes down to very bottom up. So it doesn't matter whether it's economic recovery play or not, but if the stock you're owning is something where you think the earnings are going to be very strong, the fact that it's not got impacted doesn't matter, right? I mean, because that play is now behind us. We were looking at a phase where in, say, March 20, the immediate 2-3 quarters, there were some companies where the business got really decimated. So, this whole thing about economic recovery and, the next year being stronger, the base play and all that was there. I think those things are in another quarter will be behind us. It comes back to, how strong your businesses are. I mean, are they enduring plays? How good the management quality is, because it's more like a 1 year kind of a thing, right? I mean,
the reset is just a 1 year thing. Yeah.
You completely saw a decimation, and maybe everything will not come back in a year. But now that, we already 1 year ahead from the COVID period, and as we move one or two quarter ahead, a lot of it would have got played out. So, I would be more focused on just looking at, very bottom up, and there are opportunities across today. It's very broad based opportunity.
Yeah.
So, I think, I'm spoiled for choices kind of a thing. I mean, this is one of the, very few occasions in my investing career where, I kind of have to figure out why not
problem of plenty.
It's just problem of plenty. And this is at a time when, so you could say just because market, it's not that, even when the time when markets are optically so high, you're still finding companies with 170% ROIC, companies which are, giving 90% payout ratios available at 15-16 times, forward multiples. So it's not like valuation is an issue. It's not that, business is an issue. It's not like growth is an issue. So I think for a bottom up investor, there's enough opportunities. And so I remain, that way positive, and I think there are enough opportunities.
Yeah, yesterday Rakesh Jhunjhunwala talked about the runway and how you are sounding right now that it's more broad-based, and I've seen ever.
Absolutely.
And there's no dearth of opportunities. I think every investor, whether he brings the, whatever mindset, has his own enough fodder to, really chew in this market, I think. So that brings me to the last question. I'll get Sushmit to probably answer that, and then Manish to add the last words on that question. Is that this conference, there was a lot of optimism, right? The COVID session was optimistic. Manish's session was optimistic. Rakesh obviously has to be optimistic, but even Vallabhbhai's session, optimistic. So I would say that there's a lot of optimism. Even the, strategists thought that things were looking pretty good. So there's so much optimism in the air, and markets are at an all-time high. What are the risks that one should think about at this point in time, Sushmit? And then Manish, you may top that up with a few of your thought processes on that.
Yeah, I think, actually I was very happy 3 months ago because inflation was a risk we all could hold on to, right? So we could prepare for that risk. But inflation came, and GSEC responded the other way, and the last risk that we were holding on to went away, right? So, in fact, to me, the biggest risk today is we don't see any risk.
Yeah.
if you ask me, that's why I said, 3 months ago I could see a risk. We all could talk about a risk.
Yeah.
Today there is no risk that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Inflation has been rubbished. I mean, there is inflation, but the market reaction to inflation is has surprised all of us.
Yeah.
Right. I keep telling people that 6 months ago, if I told you 5% CPI in US and 1.4% 10-year GSEC, you would have bet a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that is really the challenge to me today, which is whenever I get into a phase where I can't see a risk, is I start.
You don't know where it comes from then.
Yeah. Then it's, that you are actually getting blinded to something. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is really the risk. The second is the speed. I think it's very possible that everything happens. The panel of strategists we're talking about with Manish and Siddharth, $5 trillion market cap. What if we reach 4 trillion in the next 3 months?
Yeah.
Right. Then what?
And we are 3.1 today.
Yeah, we're already 3.1 today. What if we reach 4 trillion in the next 3 months? Then you could have a lull period for some time. Right?
Yeah.
So I would say the speed and the fact that most of us can't see a real tangible risk are the two things that I would worry about. Speed is not a bad thing, right? I mean, if Rakesh was on the other side of this conference, he'll say, "To kya hua? Speed mein kya galti hai?"
Yeah.
Right? So speed is good, but we should not put more money at the end of that speed stop. It's a pit stop that we will require, I guess.
Karan said that
Yeah.
most money comes in times like this, so you can only invest sensibly, but it comes when it comes, so you can't really
in fact,
calibrate that.
if you read this book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, and he makes a point as to why all the car companies hire good-looking men and women, right? Because likability is the first step of influence.
Right.
Correct? Now, if you take that parallel to investing, the last 12-month return is
Very likable.
very likable. So you can't blame somebody to put money, right? As fund managers, we all want people to put money in 2020 April, right? But that goes against human psychology.
And that's another facet of temperament, be greedy when others are fearful.
Yeah, it is so difficult. That's why Buffett says it, and it's still so adhered. It's so revered, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. True. Manish,
I think
crystal ball gave some risks. We need it. I mean,
I'm just looking at it from a behavioral investing point of view. Where there's FOMO factor, fear of missing out.
okay.
This will play out in a crescendo, right? With or without inflation, with or without this $4 trillion money sloshing around in the global markets, looking for returns, chasing returns, whatever you may call it. This will end in a crescendo, and then we are likely to see the same happen. It's never so easy to make money from stocks as it's seeming like now. And this comes from experience. It seemed like very easy in the run-up to the global financial crisis. We all know what happened. So inflation remains a risk, at least in India's context, and I firmly believe we're in an era of high growth, high inflation, and that will weigh in on, returns from the capital markets as well. Equity markets, it will play out for some time. If we have galloping inflation, it will come down in a third, right? Of course, the US is not exhibiting any inflation even with this, but in India's context, it's going to be likely overeating since our productivity, efficiency of capital is still quite low. Commodity prices, oil may jump up to more than $100. I mean, those are really serious warnings. The markets may play along for some time, but those are serious red flags. And another factor, even with the introduction of new age businesses in the market cap of India, we have seen this 25 to 30 P multiples on a 1 year forward basis really not sustained at a market level, really not sustained for a very long period. Now, if history doesn't repeat itself, it does generally rhyme, right? So we got to have those red flags. So companies which are trading at even with superlative earnings, if they're trading at some exorbitant multiples, we should be mindful.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you all. And it's very insightful as always. It didn't turn out to be as hard talk as I had imagined. We try and make it harder the next time. But thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.